Hi everyone, welcome back to Liz Sews. I've missed you guys. I've been a little quiet for the last couple weeks of just, I've had some business trips. I came back with a really bad cold, so last weekend I didn't even get out of bed. But I'm back, and today I have for you guys a bra tutorial for the Darcy Bralette, and this is from Eva Lelouve. If you're interested in this pattern, I will say that Eva Lelouve has a sale going on this weekend. I believe it's 20% off all of her PDF patterns from her Etsy shop, so I will be sure to link that down below. I did take a poll in my May sewing plans video, and this one edged it out just by a little bit. However, if you are interested in the Darcy Bralette by Emerald Erin, I will say that Emerald Erin, who is the bra maker, did a very excellent video tutorial about a month ago for that pattern, and it includes all of the views. So I will try to link her channel in the description box below, and let's get started on the Darcy Bralette. So the Darcy Bralette is a really great bra if you're just starting out. It doesn't even have the complexity of like sizing that a lot of the other bras I've been showing have, because it doesn't carry a cup size. So this bra is really made for somebody who is around a B or a C cup. So if you tend to make big 4 patterns and you don't have to do a bust adjustment, then you'll probably be fine with the Darcy Bralette. So it only uses the full bust measurement, and then that's how you determine your size. So for me, I have done a large. One thing I will say when you're cutting out the pattern, I noticed it doesn't really have the sizes indicated on the pattern sheet on each individual piece. So I found it a lot easier to go through, and you can see I've highlighted the line that I need so that when I'm going in and tracing it, it's a little bit easier to identify which one that I am looking for. So I will, in this tutorial, we'll be going through view 3, I believe it is, and it has this really nice sheer center front panel, and then it's a 2-piece cup. This side piece is used for all of the views in the pattern, and then most of the pattern views are just changing up in this center section. And then on the back, it attaches just like you would expect a bra to, with a hook and eye. So this is a very easy to wear, sort of low profile bra. It's definitely one that I would choose to wear more on like the weekends. It doesn't really do anything for the shape. It doesn't enhance it or shape your eyes any, but it definitely has a nice, like, comfortable around the house lounging sort of feel. So now that I've shown a little bit about this bra, let's get started and take a look at all of the different pieces.
Okay, so here we have all of the pieces cut out. You'll notice that I've done all of the scuba also in a bright pink power net, and the power net that I purchased is from Bravo Bella Bras, and they have a bunch of different colors that she dyes herself. These are really great, though I do see some dye coming out of these in the wash, so just be careful the first couple times that you wash anything from her. The scuba that I'm using I purchased from Beware out of Sweden, but I think that it originally came from Fabric Styles in the UK. So we have the inner cup and then the outer cup piece, and then these are going to be the 2 wings that go along the side. And then this center see-through piece, the directions recommend using mesh, power mesh, which is stretch, but I've had some issues with the other views of this bra being a little bit too forgiving, so too stretchy. So I've actually cut mine out of Bra Tool. I don't know if it'll work, but we will see. But the direction should all be the same regardless. And then in terms of notions, this one doesn't really require as much as most of the bras because there is no underwire. But we have some fold over elastic, and that's going to be used along the neckline and then the top of the armholes. And then I have just some picot elastic, and that is going to be used along the bottom of the bra. I have some strap elastic here, and then I will also be using ring and sliders that correspond to that. And then what I don't have pictured is we will need a hook and eye. So considering some of the other bras we've done, like the Marlboro, this one is a lot simpler. There's a lot less pieces. It should come together a lot faster, so let's get to sewing. So just a couple reminders in case this is the first bra tutorial you've done with me. The needles that I will be using is a Microtex needles, and I just use the Schmitz ones. I use these in almost everything that I sew, so I bought them in bulk. Because they come out to be just a little bit cheaper if you buy them this way. But any place you buy sewing notions will have the Microtex needle. And that's just a really, really thin needle. Now, sometimes with scuba, I might need to switch to a ballpoint. It just kind of depends, and I'll have to play it by ear. The thread that I'm using is going to be a polyester thread. I'm using one from Coats & Clark, but any polyester thread should work fine. You really want to use polyester thread just because it has a lot more strength and durability, and especially since most of the seams in the bra are going to need to like be against some tension and stress, I wouldn't use something like a cotton or silk thread. And lastly, I have the walking foot on my machine. It just helps to make sure that all of the pieces stay in place and don't slip around. But if your machine has a dual feed or something like that, you can forego the walking foot. And then if you don't have a fancy machine, that's perfectly okay. Really, the only stitches that we're going to be using are a straight stitch and a zigzag stitch. So as long as your machine can do those two options, you should be fine. So I'm not going to be using the directions for this pattern. I've just sewn a bunch of bras, and so I kind of know how I would like to do it and which order I like to sew things in. So if you're following along in the directions, I might not go along the way that she has it written, and that's just personal preference. So what I'm going to start out with is this center piece, this sheer, and you might have it cut out of mesh, or you might be like me and cut it out of bra tool. And then I'm going to use my two side cut pieces that go on either side, as well as the power net that will be the lining. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is we're going to take this piece and we want the curved end, and that's what's going to butt up against this mesh. We're going to pin it in place along this curve, right sides together. So now that we have that pinned, I'm going to turn it around to the other side, which has the mesh, and I am going to pin my lining or power net into the other side. And this way we will completely enclose our seam allowance. So once you have that done, you really shouldn't be able to see your sheer center panel at all. You'll have your lining on one side and your scuba on the other, or fashion fabric, and then that sheer piece is just sandwiched in between. So I'm going to go ahead and pin the other side of this as well. Okay, so now I have both of these sort of pinned into place. It's going to clash together a little bit. We're going to sew this with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. That's a little bit bigger than I'm used to with different patterns. Most of the time it's a 1/4 of an inch, but this particular designer, Evie Louve, has gone with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So we're going to do a straight stitch, or 3/8 of an inch, and we're going to go just down these two curves. Okay, so once you've sewn, it should look like this, and you can see my big wide 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So what we're going to do now is just fold these pieces out. We have the outside and the inside, and what you should have is this center sheer piece, and then it's sort of like all the seam allowances are sandwiched in there, so you don't really see any of them, and you get a nice clean effect. So the last thing I'm going to do on this piece, actually looks like I got a little tuck there, so I might need to unpin it and unpick that and redo that. we're going to just do a line of stitching, probably about 1/8 of an inch in on here, just to keep everything lying flat. Okay, so I have that all fixed now. So one thing that I found helped make it a little bit easier to help that the mesh lie flatter along that curve is I just clipped the mesh, you can see a little bit, and that helped me get it into the curve a little bit easier. So that might be something that you guys need to do as well. So the next thing that we're going to do, as I had said, is just do some edge stitching, and I've done it already over here, but we're gonna do it again on this side. So the first thing you wanna do to help make this seam allowance lie a little bit flatter is we're just going to clip that curved seam as well. Okay. So that should help get you a little bit flatter in that seam allowance. So I'm just going to sort of hand press this down, finger press it, and then I'm going to sew in as close, like about 1/8 of an inch from this seam. So I like to line up the edge of my presser foot with my fabric, and that is how I keep my seam allowance. And I've just finger pressed it. I don't really use any pins on this because I don't think I need to, but that should work fine. So now your center front should look like this. And then nice and clean on the inside. So we're going to finish this upper neck edge before we move on with the rest of the bra. And for that, I'm going to use a fold over elastic. Now this is about 5/8 of an inch wide, and you can see it has like a shiny side and then a matte side. I tend to always use the matte side facing out. And it has a little bit of indentation, and that's where it's going to fold. So the elastic simply just folds over and covers that seam allowance. So whenever you're using this particular pattern is made for fold over elastic, but if you wanted to add fold over elastic to something else that wasn't made for it, you would have to get rid of that seam allowance, because the way that it works is nothing gets subtracted. So you want just the full width of the product and no extra for seam allowance. So the way that I like to apply it, and this is something that I believe I saw in Orange Lingerie pattern, is I put the fold over elastic underneath and I sort of line up the edge with that center fold, and then I'm just going to baste this in place with the longest stitch I have. So for my machine, I just use my straight stitch and I push it all the way out to 5 millimeters. So now I have that basted in place. You might have a little bit of trouble at that center V, but I just, sunk my needle and then pivoted the fabric around until I got it where I thought it looked pretty good. So the next step is to actually apply the elastic. So for that, we're going to move to a zigzag stitch. And then I like to use a zigzag that's about 1 millimeter wide and 1.5 millimeters long. And I think that looks just a lot nicer. It kind of looks like a straight stitch from the front, but it still gives you enough of stretch in that seam that it works out fine. So again, I tend not to pin this, and I will just feed the fabric in folded over. So I've gotten to that center front V. So I've sunk my needle and I've made sure that it's in the left hand position when it comes down. So like if it's zigzagging going back and forth, you want to make sure it's as far to the left as it's gonna want to go. And then just pick up my presser foot, pivot just a little bit, make sure all that fabric's out of the way, and then keep going. So this is what your front should look like. Now, right now this V looks a little bit weird, but I promise you once you wear it and you get some tension on there, that's gonna flatten out fine. So now we're gonna start putting the side cups on, and just like we did for the center front, we're gonna take the scuba or fashion fabric, whatever you have, and you're gonna put it there, pin it in place, and then I flip it around and I take my corresponding lining and pin that in place. Just like we did for the front, we're going to use a straight stitch at 3/8 of an inch and go down this curve. This is a pretty gentle curve, so you shouldn't really have those same sort of issues that I did with the center front. But if you do, you can always clip it if that helps you get a nicer, flatter seam. Okay, so here we see I have just done that 3/8 of an inch seam allowance on that side cup. Now we need to do a couple of things on this before we can top stitch it down. Because I'm using scuba, this is really bulky, particularly in this section right here. So I am going to grade my seam allowances by just sort of picking up those inside pieces and trimming them down. I'm not going to worry about grading up here just because this is so thin, it's not really affecting it at all. But that will help that be just a little bit flatter. And then just like we did on the center front cup, I'm going to cut a little bit along this curve just to help things lay a little bit smoother. So now that we've done all of that prep work, oh, we might actually have to do some prep work up here at top. You can see this gets very, very narrow in the top. So I would also just sort of trim this down close to like, I don't know, what is that, 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, something like that. So we will take our two pieces, the outside and the lining, and pull them out and see what we have. So now we are going to just do a line of top stitching, and I'm going to do it on this side of the fabric, just like a scant 1/8 of an inch with a straight stitch all the way along there. It might get a little hairy once you get up to the top here, but that's okay because this is really just going to be the strap extension, so it folds down and you won't see it anyway. But, you know, try to get it as clean as possible as you can up here with just doing your straight stitch. Okay, and then once you're done, you should have something that looks like this. So I've done it again on the other side over here. And the reason that I love using this sort of lining technique is I think the insides just look really, really clean. I've used a contrasting thread, this cobalt, to match the outside scuba, but if you were to have done this with just like a matching pink thread, like it would look invisible. And I love how clean and tidy this looks on the inside. So that is the entire front of the bra, and now we are just going to attach the wings, which, if you've been following along, will be fairly familiar. Just like we did with the other two seams, it's the same method. You're going to take your fashion fabric, lay it right sides together, pin it in place, take your lining, pin it in place. Then we're going to do a 3/8 of an inch straight seam allowance, fold these out, and top stitch. So here I have that sewn in with 3/8 of an inch. Just like on the last cup, this is a bit bulky, so I am going to grade my seam allowances. I'll just take the middle two pieces and trim that down. Then we're going to fold these out. Sort of give it a nice little finger press, and then sew again on this side about a scant 1/8 of an inch just to make sure everything lays flat. So here we can see that I've just top stitched that seam down, and we have all of the construction is done. We just have to apply our elastics along the bottom and top, put in our closure, and then finally attach straps.